Welcome to this presentation, Before You Go Lean, or How Not to Get Hurt When You Embrace Manufacturing Cells. Now, I'm a big believer in lean manufacturing techniques. I'm also a big believer that the right techniques, when employed incorrectly, can hurt you badly. And this is a story of implementing one fantastic lean manufacturing technique, manufacturing cell, but not doing it quite the right way. Sometimes when you make a mistake, you can learn a lot. And in this presentation, I hope to impart on you the lessons of some of the things that you should look for in your own organization if you are thinking of implementing manufacturing cells. Now, I said I was a big proponent of lean manufacturing. The reason are because there are so many benefits. When you properly implement lean manufacturing, quality of the products produced tends to improve dramatically. In the meantime, your lead time goes down. Employees are normally much happier working in a lean environment. Your inventory drops. And most importantly, if you happen to be a profit and loss manager, your profits go up. Now let me explain to you the situation that inspired this story. As a new plant manager, the first day I came onto my new job, I walked through the manufacturing cell and I saw batches of machines, 12 screw machines all in a row, 10 grinders all in a row. I saw batches of machines all over except for one area. And in this one area, I saw 5 very different looking machines that seemed to be arranged in a horseshoe shape. I asked the supervisor giving me the tour, "What is this? Why aren't these machines in the batch lineup like everything else?" The supervisor told me that this was an experiment. It was new. It was called a manufacturing cell. Well, I went back in and talked to the general manager after the tour was over. And the general manager told me that yes, he had gone to a seminar, had heard about manufacturing cells. They sounded fantastic, and he wanted me to make this one work. So the next thing I did was I took a look at the current conditions that we were operating under. The employees in the plant were all job specialists. What I mean by that is every employee knew how to set up or operate only one type of job. Now, there were about 10 to 12 different types of machines and different types of jobs. But my predecessor as plant manager felt that training was expensive, cross-training was real expensive, and therefore trained each employee on only one type of job. Setups were fairly long. To set up a machine to go from one part to a different part would normally take an hour and a half to 2.5 hours per machine. We didn't have a preventive maintenance program. As a matter of fact, the thought was, why do you need one? If a machine breaks down, you can take the parts, put them on the machine next door, call the supplier, the parts will be flown in, you'll get them the next day, and within 2 days, that machine will be back up again. In order to make sure that our parts were of good quality, we had inspectors. Those inspectors would go around checking parts every half hour to an hour, depending on the operation, to make sure that we were in tolerance. Now, there were 5 different machines in this manufacturing cell, and the parts that were selected for the manufacturing cell, if you did an ABC stratification, A being the fast turning items and C being the real slow turning items, the C items were selected for the cell because to the people making the decision, the C items seemed to be the ones that had the most in common. Finally, employee involvement. My predecessor did not believe that employee involvement was important. As a matter of fact, he had an attitude which I call park your brains at the door. All you need to do is follow what I tell you and everything will be fine. So those were the current conditions that I found. Now let's take a look at the impact of those current conditions on the manufacturing cell. First of all, we had C items to run through the cell. Well, C items by definition means very low volume. Very low volume in the manufacturing cell meant we had very short production runs. And any manufacturing manager will tell you, short production runs are not something that we're really fond of. However, when you combine it with the next problem, it is a problem. And that problem was the setups themselves. Because the operators only knew how to set up one type of machine, and because the setups took 1.5 to 2.5 hours, in order to change the cell over from one part to another, it took 5 different operators to set up the 5 different machines. And because it took between 1.5 hours and 2.5 hours in order to set up the entire cell, when it was time to set up a cell on a new machine, it often took between 4 hours and 8 hours in order to get the right people and have them be able to spend enough time on their machines to set up all 5 machines. We had no TPM program, no preventative maintenance programs, and because we had no preventative maintenance programs, the machines, not surprisingly, would frequently go down in need of repair. And since we had no spare parts program or spare parts crib, we had to fly in spare parts. So when a machine would go down, a single machine would go down, it would take the entire manufacturing cell down until we could get the spare part and get that machine fixed, which often took 2 to 3 days. From a quality perspective, we again use inspectors to inspect in quality. As a result, the people who were running the manufacturing cell had never been trained to check for quality during production. And oftentimes, it would turn out we had been spending time producing parts that weren't any good, but the employees didn't know how to check for it. And from an employee involvement standpoint, employees had absolutely no involvement in the design or development of the manufacturing cell, didn't understand why we were doing it, and thought this was just one of those management flavor of the day exercises that would come and go in no time. The final impact on the cell of all of these problems was that most of the time, as a matter of fact, over 75% of the time, the cell was not in operation at all. So if you are getting ready to implement a manufacturing cell, There are several things I'm going to suggest that you take a look at. Employee training and cross-training, whether or not you have an effective total productive maintenance program, how you handle quality and making sure that you're producing quality parts, the setup times of your machines, the kind of production volumes you want to run through the manufacturing cell, and finally, whether or not you have your employees involved. And let me go through each of these one at a time, starting with employee training and cross-training. A manufacturing cell consists of multiple machine types. If your employees are only trained to set up or operate one machine type, and you have 4, 5, or 6 different machine types in your manufacturing cell, the first thing you're going to need to do is train your employees to operate and set up the different machine types, so that when you are ready to change your manufacturing cell from one type of machine to another, you can do it in as short a period of time as possible. Now, the output of a manufacturing cell is normally dependent on the number of operators that you have in the cell. If you put one operator in a cell, for example, you might be able to produce one part in 15 minutes. If you need to increase production in that cell, you can put 2 operators in the cell, and now instead of one part every 15 minutes, you can produce one part every 7.5 minutes. But again, this is dependent on your employees being trained to set up and operate the different machines. And you should not underestimate the time that cross-training can take, particularly if you're having to learn to set up different types of machines. Just think of how long it takes to train a setup operator on one type of machine, and now multiply that by 4 or 5. It will take some time, but the benefits are tremendous. The next thing you need to look at is total productive maintenance. If you have 5 or 6 machines in a cell and one machine goes down, you have just removed production for the entire manufacturing cell. So you really can't afford downtime in the cell. Our approach to total productive maintenance was first to train our employees to operate each of the different types of machines. Remember, we had 5 different types. So first we trained them to operate each of the 5 types, then to clean up and maintain the 5 different types of machines. Next, we trained them to set up each of the 5 machines. And finally, we trained them to do minor maintenance in each of the 5 different types of machine. We also compensated our workers for increasing their skill set. So when they went from operating the machines to cleaning up and doing simple maintenance to setting up the machines to then doing minor maintenance, every time their skill level increased, they got a pay increase. There's no better incentive to most operators than seeing a direct correlation between gaining more skills and earning more money. Needless to say, while we were doing this and implementing the total productive maintenance program, we also implemented a spare parts crib. We set up a spare parts crib so that when we did have a maintenance issue, we didn't have to call the supplier and have the parts flown in. The parts were already in our spare parts crib, and we established an inventory tracking mechanism to make sure that whenever we needed parts, we had them at our fingertips. Setup time reduction is critical in any manufacturing operation. After all, if it takes you 2 hours per machine to set up for a new part, you're not going to be able to run that machine efficiently and economically for 5 minutes before you stop that machine and set it up to run another part. So if it takes you 2 hours per machine to set up, you're going to run large batches. Well, in a manufacturing cell or in manufacturing in general, we really don't want to run large batches. We want to run small batches. Our goal is a batch of 1 if we can get there. But if we can't get there, maybe we want a batch of 10 or 20. We based our principles on SMED, single minute exchange of dies. If you've never read the book by Shingo, who was an engineer for Toyota way back in the 1950s and 60s, he wrote the book Single Minute Exchange of Dies, or SMED. His philosophy was no setup should take longer than single-digit minutes. That means no setup should take longer than 9 minutes. Now, we trained our employees on some of the principles of SMED. We got them involved, and we were able, the very first time we tried it, we videotaped a setup. We analyzed the setups with the operator. We identified a lot of the problems which caused our setup to be 2 hours long. And the very first time we tried it, we were able to reduce a 2 hour long setup to 20 minutes. The very first time. A 20-minute setup will allow you to change parts and run much smaller batches than a 2 hour setup will. And of course, our cell employees were trained to set up each machine. Once we got to the point where we could set up each of the 5 machines in between 15 and 20 minutes, that meant that one person could set up the entire cell, change it over from one part to another in less than an hour and a half. Previously, it had taken 5 setup operators to set up the machines, and it often took us anywhere from 4 to 12 hours because they were busy doing other things. From a quality perspective, we went from having quality inspectors come in every half hour, check the parts, to training our employees on statistical process control, or SPC. We did machine capability studies. Once we determined that our machines were capable, and in our case, some of our machines were not capable, so we had to do some retrofitting of the machines to make them capable of producing and holding the tolerances that they were supposed to hold. Then we implemented statistical process control, and our employees were now able to check for quality within the manufacturing cell. The volumes that you're going to put in a manufacturing cell should elicit several questions. Number one, will the production volumes justify dedicated machinery? One of the things that we discovered, because unfortunately C items, slow moving parts, had been selected to go through the manufacturing cell, they actually did not have sufficient volume to justify being in a manufacturing cell. We had to change which machines we were using so that we could run our A items, our fast moving parts. Those generated enough volume to justify a dedicated manufacturing cell. Of course, we had to make sure that the setups were fast enough in order to keep the cell operational, that our TPM program was strong enough so that we didn't have constantly machines going down. And finally, you have to make sure that your cell is structured so that you can increase or decrease your output simply by adding or removing your operators. Finally, employee involvement. The park your brains by the door, just do what management tells you to do, does not work in a lean environment, does not work if you want your employees to help you turn around your organization. You need to give your employees the training and the tools, and then let your employees lead. You'll find that with your employees leading the way, you will have a much more efficient, much more profitable organization. And now for your pre-lean checkup. Before you implement a manufacturing cell, take a look at your employee training and cross-training programs. Do your employees know how to set up and operate each type of machine that's going to be in that manufacturing cell? If they do, you're ready to move forward. If they don't, you need to get your employees cross-trained first. Next, total productive maintenance. Is your program effective? How often are your machines breaking down right now? Do you have a spare parts room with efficient and effective inventory tracking so that if a machine goes down, the spare part to fix it is definitely on hand and not just a figment of your computer's imagination? From a quality standpoint, are your employees trained in statistical process control, in Six Sigma, in other quality techniques, so that you're not relying on outside inspectors and attempting to inspect quality in instead of building quality in? Are your setup times short? Do you meet the SMED guidelines? Single minute exchange of dies. Do you have the production volumes sufficient to justify the manufacturing cell? And are your employees trained and ready to be leaders, not just followers? For more information on how to implement the lean manufacturing techniques that were described in this presentation, contact me, Mark Williams, the president of the Williams Supply Chain Group, at mwilliams@w-scg.com.